Wang, the head of China Economic Research at UBS Securities, and one of our top 5 economists for China CPI. But again, you were forecasting, thanks for joining us by the way, you were forecasting 3.9% to actually be below the forecast of the median.
Yes,
estimate.
I was below consensus.
So, okay, so 4.5%, give us your immediate reaction. Were you aghast?
I was quite surprised, but I would be the first one to admit that it's incredibly difficult to forecast any monthly numbers around the Chinese New Year. So yesterday there were people talking about electricity consumption down, but the country is shut down for more than 10 days, and so that is not surprising. So around the Chinese New Year also, not only people buy extra of certain food, but also migrant workers go home, so the delivery people, transport, everything slows down. So it's understandable, but it's comforting that PPI is still decelerating, so that means the upstream pressure is still coming down.
Okay, how discomforting is the 4.5% though?
I think for the market, there must be, a surprise, and therefore people think that the policy easing probably would be slower in coming, and they're a bit worried. In my view, though, the 4.5% is just a temporary a pickup, a blip in that downward trend of CPI this year throughout much of the first part of the year.
I must ask, you mentioned the migration, the spending. Where's all this money coming from? Is it credit?
Sorry, the migration spending?
The migration and also the spending that's happening over the Chinese New Year. All this money, is it coming from credit or is it not credit?
Well, it's traditional that the Chinese, of course, have a feast for a couple of weeks, and so there's a lot of spending. And that's why the central bank also released a lot of liquidity, basically cash, right, with reverse repos just before the Chinese New Year. And following that, liquidity actually comes back to the banks, and there's more deposits coming back.
During all this Chinese New Year, everyone was speculating of reserve ratio cut.
Yes.
Some are saying 5 this year, some are saying 3. First of all, what are you forecasting? How does this figure change that thinking?
Right. Well, this CPI figure actually doesn't change much of my feeling about the triple R cut. The central bank actually decided that the liquidity tightness around Chinese New Year is going to be temporary, so they used the reverse repo rather than a triple R cut. They announced that actually a couple of weeks before the Chinese New Year, so nobody should have been expecting any triple R cut. I think if FX, foreign exchange, continue to flow out of China, then there's a good chance that the central bank would cut the triple R, and which seemed to have been the case late last year, may have been the case right now. However, I think people would start to worry about FX inflows probably sooner than later.
How does it affect the thoughts on a strong yuan?
Yuan, I think, at this moment, probably fundamentally is not very undervalued. However, we are entering into leadership change, not just in China, but in many other countries as well. So I think politics is a key concern. We're still looking for around 3% of appreciation against the dollar this year. And your question about triple R cut, we are looking for a couple of them, just 2. Just for the year? Just for the year, about 2. But if FX come back earlier than expected, we may not even have that many.
I must throw in this then. Food inflation. Yeah. Surprising, I think.
Yes.
Rises 10.5% year on year. Non-food inflation up by 1.8%. Now, is the concern in China the food inflation? There's also the wage inflation, but is it the food the main concern for you as an economist?
Food inflation has been the dominant force in the last few episodes of inflation in China. So 10.5 seems high, but it was more than 14% just a few months ago. So it is coming down. And again, as I said, because the Chinese New Year is January this year, it was February last year. So comparing January to January, the year-on-year growth is a little misleading. So
do you think that the February figure will be below 4%? As you forecast for this month?
The February number it could come below 4%. We still have to, monitor what happened because the cold winter has come in February. Actually, the weather has been unusually cold, so we'll have to see.
Just one final question for you, if I can, Hang. Chinese credit bubbles, property bubbles. How much of a worry is the banking credit? They've been putting a lot of money. Yesterday, of course, the new government pledging the wage program going forward as well. But how much of a concern from your clients, for example, is this credit bubble right now for this year?
Right. So credit bubble and property bubble is probably two separate things.
Separate.
And in many cases where there is property bubble in the world, there is a credit bubble. In the case of China, we haven't seen much credit bubble going into the property sector. There's actually very limited leverage in the property sector, especially from the buyers. So there are a lot of concerns from clients. However, for me, I think I don't have that immediate concern right now. I think the government will actually hold a relatively prudent credit policy this year. They're not going to expand very rapidly. On the property side, I believe the government will not ease property policy very soon. And they instead will push for social housing. So I think it's not an immediate risk.
4.5%, today's figure will be the highest figure, do you think, for inflation this year?
It's likely to be the highest figure for this year. Yeah.
Very cool. Thanks so much indeed for that. Wang Tao there from UBS.